Good afternoon. Welcome to the 3 o'clock Judy Non-Civil full committee. I appreciate y'all coming in, and I'm going to say a word of blessing over this proceeding, and we're going to move forward. We've got two bills to consider here, Senate Bill 381 and 382. And the author of 381 and 382 has a conflict, and being we heard 381 before, we're going to go ahead and hear it again, and then there was a committee substitute on 382. So let me say a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the blessing you've bestowed upon us, Lord. Lord, I pray that you continue to lead, guide, and direct us, and have us through the will of the people. Give us the wisdom and the knowledge necessary to do what's best for the state of Georgia. We ask all this in your Heavenly Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen. I've already got two flashing lights here, so I'm going to go to, let's hear Senate Bill 381 first. I'm going to go to Vice Chairman Smith to give us the subcommittee. We didn't do a subcommittee on this one, did we?
We heard it, Mr. Chairman.
You did hear
yes.
it? All right, well, give me a subcommittee report on 381.
Yes, be glad to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We heard Senate Bill 381 yesterday. We had the thorough vetting of it. Appreciate all the actors involved. Thankful to Senator Robertson. He did a good job. And, Mr. Chairman, we recommend that this bill do pass.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I go any further, I want to recognize Representative Saines.
I just thought it would be an appropriate time to recognize one of our most valuable players in here for celebration of their birthday. I think it's the year of the dog for them.
Happy birthday, Representative Momptan.
Feliz cumpleaños.
Thank you very much. We did have a long discussion about Senate Bill 381 yesterday, and Representative Smith, would you mind going through the changes that were made to the and just for clarity, we've got LC 491020S. We had some conversation regarding the term of imprisonment and making sure that we have equity here for the first and second offenses. And for those of you that didn't tune in, this was the bill that is the underlying issue we're talking about is pimping and pandering. Vice Chairman Smith.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you'll see here, starting with lines 17 through 21, there's good discussion yesterday about the term of imprisonment and what imprisonment had been interpreted by the Georgia Supreme Court on, and them finding in the Langley case that imprisonment does not necessarily mean that it cannot be a probated sentence. So for the first offense there, you will see, and it also goes for the code section 16-6-12 below you'll find, and let's see, 16-6-12, when the conduct of the person under the age of 18, you'll see that the first offense, we changed the language to make sure that that reflected the first offense would be allowed to be probated, and then the second offense would carry a mandatory minimum. However, it would leave the discretion of the prosecutors, the defense counsel, and the judge signing off on that to depart from the mandatory minimum. Those go for each of those code sections you'll find in the bill here, Mr. Chairman, that we have substituted with LC 491020S.
Very good. Thank you,
And
Vice Chairman Smith.
Mr. Chairman, I forgot one thing. I have with me today one of my old Citadel buddies, Thomas Strickland, originally from Macon, Georgia. Just wanted to welcome him to Judy Non-Civil.
Welcome, Thomas. Are you from the same parts as my Vice Chairman here?
From Macon, Georgia.
Say no more. I can hear it in your voice. We've got a few people to speak to the bill. First, I'm going to recognize Taylor Hawkins from Frontline Policy. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We appreciate Senator Robertson for bringing this bill. Appreciate y'all for hearing it. We believe very strongly in the protection of human dignity in our state, as I mentioned in subcommittee hearing, and we believe that putting every barrier possible between predators and people who prey on vulnerable women and girls in our state. And I've looked at different varying statistics. I don't know which one is exactly accurate, but an overwhelming number of those who end up as prostitutes start out molested as children and even trafficked as children. And so we're talking about a pipeline issue here that starts even well before the age of consent, as some of that issue was brought up in the subcommittee hearing as well. And so we're talking about a horrible situation that is incredibly demeaning to human dignity of everyone involved and really of everyone in our state. And so we would strongly urge that you pass this legislation to strengthen the penalties and send a strong message, not just deterring. I think the primary deterrent effect is in preventing reoccurrence in the criminals that are caught in these behaviors, but in preventing those predators from further harming women and girls in our state. And so we would urge this committee to pass on this legislation.
Thank you, Taylor. Any questions from the committee? Representative McLaurin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for your testimony. Has there been any discussion, either offline or online in the subcommittee, because I wasn't here for that, about the need specifically for a mandatory minimum penalty as opposed to leaving a trial court discretion, to do with the sentence what they want? I mean, what's the specific policy rationale for that mandatory minimum?
There was representative, and Chairman Smith may be able to address this as well. But one of the reasons for raising it, especially with regard to pandering, was that sometimes when you have a sting operation or something like that, and girls in this instance or females are taken into custody, as well as the Johns in this circumstance, they can post bail and get out in a few hours and be home without any necessary explanation, without any punishment before they go through the process there, and they can. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't remember all the steps of the process, but basically they can avoid the penalty, and like I said, maybe Chairman.
I think I can help with that. Representative McLaurin, if you'll see there in each one of those sections for the second or subsequent offense, that is actually going to be subject to to three individuals having to approve that. That's the prosecuting attorney, the defendant, and then the judge would have to accept that agreement between the prosecutor and the defendant. They could depart from that mandatory minimum.
You mean, if there's a plea arrangement, essentially?
Yes, they would enter into a negotiated plea on that.
Okay. But ultimately, if you go to trial, you're convicted, no discretion for the judge, right? Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Taylor. Second up, we've got Camilla Zulfkani from Street Grace.
Thank you so much, Chairman. My name is Camilla Zulfagari. I'm Executive Director of Street Grace. For those of you who don't know me prior to this, I was Attorney General Sam Olin's human trafficking prosecutor. Before that, I led the human trafficking unit for Fulton County, so I've prosecuted and been on sting operations for many of these cases. We have sent a fact sheet, particularly on buyers, with some evidence-based data on why it's important to go after the demand. And if anybody, there are in your email boxes, but you're welcome to have a printed copy. Oops. There you go.
Would you pass those out?
Sorry, thank you.
Oh, they are? Okay.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That was fast. One thing, for those of you who were in the subcommittee, somebody mentioned that the State Department tip report had attacked the work that Georgia has done. That was for the country of Georgia. The State Department only reviews countries and not individual states, and I spoke to the former ambassador at large who writes the tip report to make sure my understanding of that was correctly. Georgia has done amazing work in this area, and the majority of it has come through this room. This has been one of our priorities for the last 5 years, to strengthen our penalty around demand. And one of the reasons was when we were working with law enforcement, what they were saying, and their problem is we have these revolving doors, repeat offenders, these people who are buying, who are part of the fueling of trafficking, and they're still getting misdemeanors. And that is a deterrence. Not only are felonies, the higher penalties deterrence, but particularly when you're dealing with the crime of buying and selling sex. If you are online, perhaps on Reddit, you don't even have to go to the dark web to find boards where buyers and sellers of sex, pimps and buyers, I try not to use the word John's way too nice of a word, but are talking about how to sell girls, how to buy girls safely. And they have conversations across the country when penalties rise in a certain state. And also they have conversations when law enforcement begins to focus on an area. This summer I was at the International Association of Human Trafficking Investigators Conference. And one of the experts who was speaking is actually from Gwinnett County. He's known internationally, really, as an expert in these undercover operations. And when somebody said, "So why aren't you going after the buyers?" He says, "Well, we have limited resources, and the penalties are still too low." Law enforcement is very excited about this potential change. We really appreciate the work of the subcommittee yesterday and Senator Robertson for bringing this forward. We thank you very much, and welcome to take questions if anyone has any. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. You have one question?
Sure.
Representative McLaurin?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for that testimony. I find it really interesting, actually, and I want to hear more about your experience with potential violators of the statute talking about penalties, because I think one thing that I try to, not to be a broken record on, but to emphasize for the committee, is there's an assumption a lot of times that increased penalties deter. But some of that is just ideological in some cases, because if you don't have evidence that potential violators are actually talking about and corresponding about, hey, that it's part of their thought process,
Yeah.
then it's not as compelling. But what you're saying is something super different, which I think is important for the committee to reflect on. You're saying that they're actually pretty well evolved marketplace. I mean, that's such
Right.
an awful term to use, but I mean,
It is.
but practically there are places where people discuss the practice from an economic standpoint or from a social standpoint. And I just want to note, I find that more compelling in terms of a deterrence argument, but I want to know more from you about the types of conversations had. Is it actually evolved enough, these conversations, to where, have you seen yourself discussion of penalties on the
So
web?
I do not know that they are aware of this bill per se. But yes, there's certain sites that are horrifically like Yelp for bodies. Rub Maps, Escort Review. It changes over the years, but as a prosecutor, I spent considerable amount of time, especially when we were still investigating a case, searching through there. And the conversations will range from, I think this person is warning this was undercover law enforcement, so-and-so went there to arrest, to they're really cracking down on this in Dunwoody. They now have a female undercover officer, so they're going after demands. They're really serious now. The Attorney General's office just indicted, it was a trafficking case, the child was underage, but just indicted 9 buyers. And it's the first time we've done that in a state where we have gone after the multiple buyers. And part of it is those laws were changed, and now we're looking at changing those. But yeah, I don't recommend you go down that path of reading those, and it certainly starts to flag stuff real fast on your public computers, but law enforcement does spend time on those sites watching people, and they spend time talking about penalties, defenses, and where law enforcement isn't working and where they are.
Thank you so much for that, and that does actually answer my previous question about the rationale for a mandatory minimum. I think I just want to say for the record that this is probably the most evidence of deterrence specifically that I've ever heard in this committee in 4 years. And that's not necessarily to say that we have hard and fast evidence that'll work, but so often I'm asking for evidence that when we increase penalties it will do something, and that's the type of testimony I'm looking for to my colleagues who think that I am in fact a broken record. But I appreciate you sort of shedding some light on that, and I think that's going to help my deliberation, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ms. Camilla. Lastly, to speak to 381, we have Jill Travis from GATCO.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm not going to repeat what was Ms. Girton had to say yesterday. I do look to this substitute and see some improvements in it, and I appreciate the subcommittee's work on it. I would ask specifically if you would consider deleting some words on lines 27, 28, 40, 41, and 54, and that's the phrase, when the prosecuting attorney and the defendant have agreed to a sentence. Because to the point of departing below a mandatory minimum, what you're essentially doing is you've only provided one person with the power, and that's the prosecutor. The criminal defense lawyer can't ask the judge on his own. The judge on his own can't decide to go below the mandatory minimum. It's only when the prosecutor agrees. So I like the idea of departing below the mandatory minimum, as much as I don't like having a mandatory minimum. But to give it a fair playground, I would ask that you consider deleting the words, when the prosecuting attorney and defendant have agreed to a sentence, on lines 27, 28, 40, and 41, and 54. I'll also point out perhaps what is most obvious to all of you is, we're talking about repeat behavior, and and some of this bill is speaking to repetitive behavior. However, you're also punishing the first offender on lines 17 to 21 and lines 30 to 34 from what was a 1 year or 12-month sentence, and now is going to be a 10-year, possibly a 10-year sentence. It's an awfully huge increase for a first offense. And contrary to the speaker that was two before me, that the revolving door of people coming in and out on bond, I don't think that's going to happen if 504 passes. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Jill. Any questions? Hearing no questions, that's all. Thank you. Anybody else? Vice Chairman Smith.
At the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to move do pass.
Got a motion do pass on Senate Bill 381, LC 491020S, and a second. Are there any amendments being offered? Representative McLaurin.
Yeah, I'd like to propose the first failed McLaurin amendment, and that's going to be at line 20. Change the word 10 to 5. And that's the amendment.
We've got a motion for an amendment. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of the McLaurin's first amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say aye.
No.
No. Excuse me. By show of hands, all those in favor of McLaurin's first amendment, just raise your right hand. Two.
Yeah.
All those opposed to McLaurin's first amendment, raise your right hand. It's the opinion of the chair that the amendment fails. We're still in the posture of amendments.
So thoroughly discouraged by the failure of my First Amendment, I'll withdraw any further amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative McLaurin. So we are in a posture of we've got a motion do pass and a second for Senate Bill 381 LC 491020S. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of passage signify by raising your right hand.
Yes.
All those opposed? Measure passes unanimously. On the rules. Thank you. The second piece is Senate Bill 382. We're going to have a little bit longer. And listen, we have a hard stop at 3:55. Representative Saines, because you have a significant committee substitute, I'm going to ask that you present this bill, please. You can present from right there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've worked with the author of SB 382, Senator Robertson, to accomplish two birds with one bill. We both look at doing consistency with the Romeo provision in child molestation and aggravated child molestation, which is addressed in line 42. Instead of modifying aggravated child molestation, we modified child molestation to parallel. Instead of starting at the age of 14, it would start at the age of 16. And then we take what began as a Senate conversation in their study committee on dangerous sexual predators in 2019. They failed to take any action on it, which luckily there's another chamber in this legislature. We've looked at the appropriate steps to ensure that Georgians are safe from the most heinous of and most likely to reoffend for sexual offenses, with and added a lot of the language in House Bill 194 to Senate Bill 382, which I'd call your attention. There's 13 crimes that are listed that kind of summarize the bill's intent, which starts on page 9. Begins with aggravated assault with the intent to rape and ends with sexual exploitation of children. It would add for the second adjudicated offense the possibility of life, which would allow for the utilization of GPS monitoring, which is shown to be one of the most effective ways to ensure a non-reoffense in these crimes. I would then put attention, because there's an intentional shall there, because SORB gave us the information that a judicial discretion is most appropriate after we have data on how at risk these offenders are for reoffending. We do have in page 15, line 353, the ability for, or the requirement that after 10 years, page 14, line 332, the requirement that Department of Community Supervision after 10 years and then every 5 years subsequently, to look if the offender has met the provisions from line 335 to 340 to be taken off that probation. That's the bill. I would highlight one comment that SORB did a review last year of all the offenders in their system, and it was 7% that could even possibly, out of the 12,278 levels they've done, there's only 7% of these individuals that would possibly qualify if this bill were around upon their sentencing. Those are the most dangerous sexual predators in our state, that the most likely to reoffend, and I think that's worth noting. It adds the context of how specific we were in crafting this bill to address the most dangerous sexual predators in our state.
Thank you, Representative Saines. We've got Jill Travis signed up from GATCL to speak to this bill.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. This bill was heard just 2 days ago in the Senate, and it wasn't voted out. I reminded the Senate committee, and I'll remind you, that there was a study committee that is true, didn't take action, but it recommended that the legislature give judges discretion to include lifetime ankle monitoring in a sexual offender's actual sentence by having the leveling information from the SORB available at the time of sentencing. While this bill does achieve the goal of making that information available to sentencing with one hand, it completely takes it away with the other hand. And the reason it takes it away, and 100% takes it away, is because of the word shall in various locations of this bill.
Have you identified everywhere it's at, shall?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Lines 49, 51.
All right, you slow down while 49. Okay, never mind. I already got a list.
Yeah. Do you want me to say it out loud for the record or no?
Sure, please.
49, 51, 67, 69, 89, 91, 100, 102, 110, 112, 121, 122, 149, 151, 160, 162, 180, 181, 190, 192, 200, 202, 244, 246. I
Okay.
would,
Tell me you told me what it does by taking away the judge's discretion. And what if we were to change the word shall to may, tell me what that would do.
it would give the judge the decision power to determine whether a lifetime sentence is appropriate for this particular person that committed this act.
Based on the facts of this individual case, right?
That's right.
So it would give them still the levity to require lifetime monitoring?
It would.
I recall last year from hearing this bill that we had, there was a case I think we referenced regarding this lifetime monitoring. Do you have any concerns regarding the lifetime monitoring now, or has that issue been resolved?
The that case was Parks, and you know, I'm not an expert in this field, but so I cannot say that lifetime monitoring is the solution to every person's situation. But I do know that there are many examples, and I've given these before, but you know, it's not unheard of a 21-year-old to have sexual relations with a 16-year-old. That's a college senior dating a freshman, and imposing. I realize that this would have been a second offense, but there's also punishments. We have 2 strikes you're out in Georgia. We already have increased punishment for these types of crimes. Enticing a child for indecent purposes can often happen in sting operations. You've heard testimony about that during the last few weeks. Improper sexual contact can be 22-year-old substitute teacher that's involved romantically with a 17-year-old student. None of this is good behavior. This is obviously awful behavior and deserves punishment. But what I'm asking you to do is to let the judge decide what is appropriate in that particular circumstance.
Very good. Do you, I had another question that occurred to me. You mentioned the Senate heard this, 2 days ago, and what was their big hang up on it? Now, I have the utmost respect for the Senate. We do a lot of perfection over here on this side of the House with some of their bills, so I just wanted to get your take as to what their issue was with the bill. Is it the shall and may?
Well, all I can tell you is from the outside looking in, because I don't sit behind that row right there, so I don't know what conversation was going on. I do know that the comment was made by one of the senators that if the bill was moved, it would have been his motion to change the shalls to may.
Very good.
That was Senator Cowsert.
We got a question for the Ms. Jill, Representative Saints.
But the bill wasn't moved.
Very good.
I do remember the senator making a comment about a motion. He didn't specify what motion he would make, but that was my understanding of it.
It's recorded.
I understand that. Do you let me make sure I'm clear on this. With the Department of Community Supervision revision review that's required in this case, do you agree that gives the judge discretion during that review to see if this is an appropriate sentence or not?
Sir, that takes place after the person has served at least 30 years in prison and at least 10 years on probation. So it's a 20-year-old person or a 25-year-old person. Now they're 60 or 65. Yes, the judge has wonderful discretion 40-some years later to take the person off of ankle monitoring, to take them off of probation. But it doesn't do anything to solve it on the front end. It doesn't open the door. You keep talking about these 10 years. 10 years doesn't happen until the person's finished their prison sentence, and they're not eligible for parole on a life sentence until they've served 30 years.
So further question, given that SORB gave us data that when they reviewed their current leveling in at 7%, which is correlated to 7% that they level as dangerous sexual predators. You agree, because of Park v. State, that if a judge were not to utilize, if we were giving the judge discretion at the initial onset of that second offense, that they were, and they did not give that lifetime sentence, there is no ability for this state to utilize what experts do agree is one of the highest abilities to prevent reoffending. There is no longer any ability after that individual served their sentence to put a GPS monitoring, leaving Georgians more vulnerable to being victims.
There's so much in that premise that I cannot agree to your statement.
Thank you, Representative Saines. Representative McLaurin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mr. Travis. I think it's probably fair to say, and most people in here understand, that I vote the way that you would prefer quite a bit. The last bill I did not, but this one, you know, if I could try to find the middle on this, because I want to articulate a rationale for this that's bipartisan and makes sense to everybody. The way that I understand the shall to may suggestion on this bill in particular is that the origin of this bill was not an independent review of the sufficiency of the sentencing for each of these offenses. The origin of this bill was a practical problem relating to ankle monitoring in a court case. And so the impetus for this was to try to find a way around that problem, and increasing sentences to such an extreme degree was thought to be the least offensive practical way to do that. At least that was what I understood the authors of the bill, the impetus of the bill to be. And given that unique circumstance that we're not increasing penalties in all these different code sections because we've thought these penalties need to be increased from a substantive standpoint, but just because we're trying to solve this practical ankle problem, to me that would increase the level of review or scrutiny that I would want a judge to apply to that increased sentence. Because again, in my mind, the sentence is not being tailored to the offense. The sentence is being tailored to like a practical administrative problem. And so I would want the judge to stand in the gap to be able to analyze whether that was appropriate on a case-by-case basis. Does that fairly summarize some of your thinking on this, or is there anything you would add about why, in this case, there would need to be extra scrutiny about the length of the sentence imposed?
That does fairly summarize my position. In Park, what it was the person who was sentenced, their sentence was completed, and yet SORB wanted them to continue to be monitored. Well, you can't make somebody do something after the sentence is completed. If this is a situation, now remember, if this bill were to pass, and if this bill were to have a may, at the time of sentencing, the judge is now going to have the power and the information before him to determine what is the appropriate sentence. And if there's this question mark in their mind that this might be a person that potentially needs more supervision, give them life. And then, to Mr. Saines's, Representative Saines's point, after 40 years, possibly change that. But if this is a person who comes before the court and the circumstances, they've been leveled by SORB, it's a person they don't think is a high risk, then don't make the judge give a life sentence.
I appreciate that. And I think I just wanted to note for the committee, and thank you for confirming, this is different from the mandatory minimum we just looked at, right? There's a different policy rationale for why this is happening. And I think because it's such a unique, strange set of circumstances to be opening up all these penalties the way that we are, I would really appreciate having trial judges with, that buffer of discretion to be able to analyze the appropriateness. So thank you, Ms. Travis, for your testimony.
Thank you.
Jill, thank you for your testimony. Representative Vice Chairman Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I would move that we pass the substitute to Senate Bill 382, LC number 480629S, and I will offer an amendment once that time is appropriate.
Very good. I've got a motion to pass Senate Bill 382, LC 480629S. Do I have a second? Second. I have a second. Now we're in the posture of amendments. Vice Chairman Smith.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we amend LC 480629S, and where it says shall in the following line number or lines, we change the shall to a may for the following lines. Line 49, line 51, line 67, line 69, line 89, line 91, line 100, line 102, line 110, line 112, line 121, line 122, line 149, line 151, line 160, line 162, line 180, line 181, line 190, line 192, line 200, line 202, line 244, line 246.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Smith. I've got an amendment we'll call the Smith Amendment. Got a motion to amend. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. All those in favor of the Smith Amendment signify by raising your right hand. Representative Byrd, are you tracking? Can you?
Yep, I'm here.
Are you in support of the Smith Amendment?
Yes.
Very good. The amendment passes. We're in the posture of passage for Senate Bill 382 LC 480629S as amended. All those in favor of passage of the measure signify by raising your right hand.
Aye.
3. All those opposed signify by raising your right hand. All right, passes on the rules. Thank you. With that, we're adjourned.